Alright, good evening everyone. Good morning everyone. Welcome to the chat. Welcome to the stream. Today is another Just Chatting stream as we go through the news and various items and things that have caught my eye over the last, well, weekend really. We haven't had much else to cover. Alright, let's get ourselves underway. Hopefully it won't be too long this morning. First things we want to look at is we looked at Gen Z stuff in previous weeks, the Gen Z protests, the disaffected Zoomer protests that have gone global. One of the places that was getting fairly heavy protests and had killed 22 odd protesters was Madagascar, and the president of Madagascar was under threat of having to resign. Um, Based on the protests. What's happened since then is the allegations that there's been a coup underway. The first thing is that, I wonder if this article will actually cover it. Okay, here we go. So, one of the top military units over the weekend that had helped the president come to power initially has declared itself in command of all the military forces, and some of the officers and troops associated with it have basically changed sides and are now protesting or joining the protesters, at least. Uh, that well, the ones joining the protesters is the big thing. The ones that are declaring themselves in command of all the forces is more interesting. What has not, well, the latest information that's come to light is that he's now saying, the president is now saying that there was an attempt on his life and that it was potentially led by the military. I wasn't really aware of the politicians against him to that extent. Certainly, as the protests led, and there's the reports of the military units changing sides, that okay, potentially there could be. There was discussion initially that it was like they're heading down the path towards an attempted coup. This looks a little more substantive now. There was, uh, well, I hadn't heard this either, but unconfirmed reports suggesting he'd left the country on a French aircraft, but he's hiding somewhere in a safe place. So the question is, what's going on? Um, yeah, if you seize the state media, it's generally a sign that things are heading on their way. So with the president not being seen, I mean, says he's still alive, but not being seen, that, well, the military apparently is running the place. But the protests are still ongoing, and uh, it'd be interesting. I'd said the last week or the other week when the news first came up that it's unlikely we'd hear much more coming out of Madagascar. Um, well, sadly we are. Sadly, because it's basically not good news. It seems like every time there's another article, the details get more and more distressing. So, I mean, the idea that uh, basically part of the government's left the country and gone to Mauritius doesn't bode well for the immediate future. Almost three quarters of the people live below the poverty line in Madagascar. they're, yeah, clearly a nation that uh, has struggles. Um, I mean, just over a third of people with access to electricity. Yeah, I think it sort of meets the criteria of a developing nation quite well. So, I mean, yeah, it's had unrest, but well, it I mean, the idea that he gained, um, well, this guy gained power by protest. Well, in the wake of protests initially, voted out, voted back in, but uh, corruption and cronyism sounds like the sort of complaints that are perpetuating the Nepali or the Nepal um, protests as well. So, I mean, the fact that it said the inner circle of left and the military's trying to run things, I can see the military trying to stabilize things. Nothing I've seen or heard suggests that it's a completely independent military-led coup. We'll see. Hopefully they can resolve it safely. That'd be nice. Speaking of places that we're hoping can resolve things safely, we're not going to do too much about the main actions or the main activity in relation to Gaza and Israel at the moment. I mean, I've seen, no, in fact, we will cover it shortly. This is probably more stuff that's going to impact how the ceasefire goes, how the peace plan goes. And if you know anything about the political and security aspects of Gaza after Israel's initial withdrawal. I can't remember what year that was, but basically, in 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 a nutshell, the Palestinian territories, the West Bank and Gaza, basically have two different governments. You have the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. They, in general terms, were what the PLO evolved into over time. Then you had Hamas. And Hamas were previously seen as a far more militant and hardline group than the Palestinian Authority. And when they seized power, I think they were initially voted in, but then seized power in the Gaza Strip. They then used a series of um, purges, basically, a lot of public executions. They effectively destroyed any legitimate opposition parties or political opposition to their rule and their imposition of security over the Gaza Strip. Some people would have said that they were little more than thugs in that regard. Uh, Others would have seen them a bit more differently. Since the initial ceasefire agreement, I've seen a lot more coverage on social media, on X in particular, of footage alleging to be different clans, different groups within Gaza now engaged in running battles with Hamas. Now, these groups previously would not have had the courage um, to do this because otherwise Hamas would have basically executed them all. And now they're actually engaged in running battles with Hamas, which makes one wonder what the perceived security structure was, or political structure, that a lot of the protesters in Western nations had when they were protesting um, for peace in the Middle East. It's also, I guess, a big step towards Hamas being demilitarized and removed as a uh, militarized force, so to speak. If the various other clans and groups are going to take them on and win, well, that achieves the goal that the peace plan sets out. There is also a set of questions. Oh, and so the footage of that sort of stuff and the discussions tends to have some very interesting comments in return. People are alleging that the people sharing the footage or trying to talk about it are little more than pro-Israeli shills, and that what's being shown is either fake or from previous years and things like that. There's a lot of denial going on, to be quite frank. There are a couple of questions that have been raised about who's funding all of it. Where have these groups found funding? And have they always had this funding, or is this more of a thing that has taken place post the ceasefire agreement? There's certainly desire, maybe not as openly expressed in the past as it is now, for other groups to have their say in the future of the Palestinians and to the future of the Gaza Strip. And so there's funding arriving from other nations, other groups, to fund these other clans, etc. When this particular set of clashes, I'm not going to Dugmush family, they were basically, if the comment wasn't calling you an Israeli shill, it was denying that it was happening, and or that it was being fostered by other people, that there should be no such thing. Well, we'll see. Some of the allegations, though, associating with it, not just the fact that the clash is going on, was where the fighters were coming from. Some of the footage initially suggested that armed operatives were coming out of hospitals, uh, well, definitely out of tunnel systems and things, and that there's, well, growing internal conflict, or not so growing internal conflict, an attempt to settle old scores. And so yeah, they've been fighting each other, and more than 300 fighters came out of, well, Hamas was able to put more than 300 on the streets as part of the battle, and yeah, people were a bit surprised. They were like, well, hang on, it's not the Israelis attacking; it's one group attacking another. And I mean, clearly there's no love lost there between the groups, and hasn't in the past. So it will be, it'll be interesting to see what happens now in the future. And uh, it's, I think if the allegations are true about a lot of external funding coming into these sort of groups, and also there's obviously groups who've also got a vested interest in Hamas's outcome, yeah, it would be. I think the next couple of months are going to be interesting to see what happens on the streets in Gaza and how much support is received from the international community and in which direction. So it expands on the previous article. Over 7,000 members of its security forces coming to provide control and security. Obviously, there's a bit of a vacuum that's caused after the Israelis pull back, and it's largely uh, militarized background. Statements like oh, this, which apparently came out of Hamas, heading to their fighters to cleanse Gaza of outlaws and collaborators. We're going to see, or there's going to be many, 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 many reports of extrajudicial executions. And there's already been footage and imagery to suggest that that's already happening. Again, the commentary surrounding it is either people are pro-Israeli shills, or this is old footage, which in some cases it's only a few weeks old. But people say, "Oh no, it's outdated." It's like, well, no, it's still recent, still pertinent to the current event. We're going to see a purge, unfortunately, and it didn't help with what the initial incident was that set things up. And yeah, it's yeah. Um, okay, well, there is obviously, and we're going to look at an article next, which talks about the the first phase of the peace plan of the ceasefire deal is in place and seems to be rolling forward. The remaining elements, in particular the de-arming of Hamas, is one area where we think that, well, people are sort of anticipating that agreement and forward progress is going to be a lot harder to be achieved. Whether or not all or most of the 20 points are implemented is yet to be seen. Now, Hamas obviously is saying, well, look, we're not going to leave the place to thieves and militias or the Israelis, and that their occupation or their position is legitimate. Well, the 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 point being, they're there to resist occupation, but Israel had withdrawn from the Gaza Strip and only re-entered post October 7, 2023. So does that, unless they mean the occupation is the Levant, in which case, okay, well, Hamas is basically saying they're never going to go away. Um, it it will be again potential civil war, maybe. There's quite clearly a lot of weapons and fighters in Gaza that are preparing for a very bloody period. Now, there's an article. Um, I mean, if you're reading most Western media, a lot of the opinion coverage and article coverage is doing its best to diminish the contribution of Trump. It's doing its best to diminish the outcomes of what's going on. And probably the one of the better articles, or one of the more refined articles, is the one I found here, which talks about the fact, or the difficulties, even getting to the first point with Israel and Hamas, but the expectation that it's not going to proceed much further. Uh, how legitimate is that? Well, I mean, a lot of people probably expected it not to even get to this point. So that has already been overcome once. Uh, does that mean the expectations that people hold are not accurate? Well, to an extent. If people got it so wildly wrong on even getting to this point, how accurate are their forecasts for what's coming next? It's a bit hard. But in terms of the mediators having a bit of a chat about things, quite clearly the Qataris have had a fairly heavy involvement with it because they've provided a degree of support and protection to Hamas over time, hence Israel's strikes against Hamas in Qatar the other week. And I mean, issues such as Hamas's arsenal, well, they're very much unlikely to be handing it back, particularly if they're about to dip into a civil war. And um, the idea that a comprehensive agreement's not quite ready. Again, oh, it'll be interesting. Obviously, there are issues that will take time to thrash out. The agreement, I think, can be agreed to in principle. It's the particulars that are going to be causing problem. And yep, I mean, this is a very, very fair statement that you weren't going to get all 20 points agreed to straight up. There's some very touchy points in there, I guess, for Hamas. And like I was saying the other week when I was talking about it, it's alleged that the initial plan that Trump had put forward, based off coming out of talks with Islamic nations at the UN General Assembly, that Israel had then applied pressure or had negotiated to have their interests better represented in the 20-point plan. And then Israel obviously agreed to it first. So you'd expect there to be an evolution of the 20 points. More maybe to a middle ground. There may be more concessions for the Palestinians. There may be stuff wound back for the Israelis. Who's to say? I mean, we saw when Trump was addressing the Knesset just in the last 24 hours that there was overwhelmingly warm reception. There was still dissatisfaction by some, to be expected, quite honest. Um, the involvement of Macron is something that I think Trump did say that there are a couple of world leaders present at the various events in the last 36, 48 hours who he did not like and presumably did not think they had a role to be there. Now, the people of reading between the lines have kind of looked at Macron and Starmer as being who he was talking about because he levied criticism against them about their recognition of Palestine as a state, how that had influenced the ability to even draw up the 20-point plan. And so there's a there's a question. That said, I mean, article opens and says, "Oh look, it's not going to happen. We're not getting there." It's still positive. The doors are still open. People aren't ready to step through you just yet. That's okay. But the doors are open. And the most important thing that's been achieved now is there's a ceasefire. Israel's withdrawing to the agreed upon withdrawal lines and hostages are being returned. They haven't all been returned just yet. It's believed all the live hostages have been returned, and some of the remains have been returned. And yeah, okay, they're going to talk about it. Um, a 5 to 10 year truce. I think that's going to be I don't see that being agreed to under Trump's plan. It's more going to be pushed towards a permanent truce, well, permanent peace, and well, quite clearly they're opposed to disarmament. Uh, I, in looking at the 20-point plan, it is effectively dismantling Hamas as an entity or as a viable entity, and quite obviously they're not going to agree to that. I mean, despite what good for their people may come out of it. And then this comes down to what are the motivations of Hamas. If they're not going to agree to it, then it kind of sends the message that it was never about the Palestinian people. It was about eradication of another people. And this then goes into the question and the debate of just what it is that people are protesting for in the West and what is it that, well, Hamas in particular are aiming for. Now, they're one of the main pushers of the whole from the river to the sea statement. And the funny thing that was also raised, that I saw raised in discussion this morning, so in the last 24 hours, was okay, the ceasefire's in place. There's been a lot of whining and complaining in opinion columns and in the media of, oh, this is never going to work. It's not Trump's, doesn't deserve credit, and so on and so forth. And then we've seen protests continue. And it's like, well, what are you protesting for now? There's an effective ceasefire, there's a progression towards a peace plan, there's progression towards formal recognition of the Palestinian people as a statehood and things like that. It's like pretty much everything people have asked for is there. So if you're going to continue to protest and continue to get out there and well, continue to protest in the face of everything that's going on, starts giving more fuel to the argument that it's little more than anti-Semitism. It was never about recognition of the safety of the Palestinian people. It was about eradication of the Israeli people. And that if you're going to argue that what was happening in Gaza was a genocide, then some people have suggested that should get credit for ending a genocide, which I don't think is going to go down very well with a whole subsection of the population. But you've if you want us to use if you want people to use the words that you're protesting for and use your own arguments, you've got to accept it when those things are changed or those things are addressed. And so the question is, well, why is there still protests going on? It looks like we've reached the goals that a lot of these people have said. Oh, from the river to the sea. That's not going to happen. That's in itself a genocidal statement. And there's some people already whispering and already discussing in more hushed tones that we're going to see with these ongoing protests that it was never an idea about, um, well, Palestinian, about the Palestinian people, about self-determination and things like that. No, 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 no. They were just a tool to be used for the broader purpose. And yeah, I mean, some of that's jumping at shadows, but there's still quite a lot to it that has, well, still a lot of merit to it. Uh, the it is interesting though to see that Hamas is no longer a coherent entity in this regard, and that there's sort of factions starting to split, and well, some hardlining, some softening, etc. And well, to a an earlier understanding of what Hamas are and what they stood for, the idea that they don't want to give up their weapons or they should refuse to give up their weapons, even if it means more war, well, that's kind of what their charter and everything else has said and they've stood for, and their behaviour seems to imply that over time. Uh, I'm more of the opinion that there needs to be more pragmatism in it because that first statement is going to lead to, well, more blood being shed and an eventual destruction of one group or the other. And what I think what Trump did to help get the 20-point plan a lot more palatable or more likely to be accepted was to effectively cut off international support for Hamas at the knees. Not so much from protesters, but from the governments and nations that were more openly supporting them or that have the influence with Hamas and other Palestinian groups that the US doesn't. It's the carrot and the stick approach. While the article says that they've given up leverage with Israel, Israel's also returned a lot of prisoners. There's, you could argue the same in the other direction, that Israel gave up a lot of leverage by returning, well, uh, part of the prisoner return is supposed to be all women and children, all people arrested post October 7, 2023, and a bunch of others as well. And there are articles over the weekend of survivors of terrorist attacks or Palestinian attacks who quite realistically or quite understandably were opposed to seeing them released from prison in order to secure the return, like as part of this thing. There are some of them who are like, yeah, they can't forgive the attackers. They can't accept that they've been allowed or being allowed to be exchanged in return for the hostages. Some of them are pragmatic and saying, look, yep, as painful as it is for us personally, and as terrible an idea as it is from a security point of view, we understand that this is part of the path forward to a longer term peace, which everybody should want. I can also understand that, yes, it does look like a surrender to the to Hamas if the plan goes through. I mean, it's what it looks like on the surface, and uh, it, yeah, the what has changed is how the international sport goes. We'll see how it goes forward. All right, okay. So, yep, not much else. Okay, that originally came from the New York Times. What is somewhat abhorrent is this, which popped up this morning. Yes, this morning. The idea that there is a Australian political party that has been invoking the attacks of October 7th, 2023 for political fundraising and political purposes. Uh, it's the Greens, so on a left-right political line. They're very much to the left. Um, some of their party Illuminati in the past were communists when, well, I'm not sure if the Communist Party still exists in Australia, but some of them came from there. They're certainly a lot further left than the Labor Party, who's the party in power at the moment. The the fact that they used now the article alleges that it wasn't done or didn't come from party leadership, but it came from the party in some manner. There's people washing their hands of responsibility quite quickly. But the idea that they're either invoking it as part of a fundraising drive, um, yeah, leads the Big Brother to say that they're using the humanitarian crisis for their own gain. Well, yeah. Um, so even though the peace agreement was underway and stuff like that, donate today to help end the occupation and stand with Palestine. Okay, well, Israel weren't occupying Gaza Strip until after the October 7th attacks. But it seems the protest class just choose not to remember that or choose not to think that. And the uh, the Greens, sometimes people wonder if they've lost the plot. But the idea of linking the the synagogue attack in Manchester to this position held by the Australian government or by the Australian Prime Minister, yeah, that's a very long bow to draw. I mean, there's plenty of reasons why the attack in Manchester took place, but to say that an Australian political position influenced that, I mean, we like to think our own nations are important, but they're not that important. And yeah, and the idea that, well, if you stand with Palestinians, surely you should be celebrating the peace plan and everything else that's in place. And so I'm saying, if this is this idea, and this is this suggestion that the political class, it's not about peace, that it's about manipulating distress over Gaza for their own benefit. Excuse me for a second. That, yeah, it's manipulating distress for their own benefit. It's, ah, it doesn't put the Australian Greens, or the New South Wales branch in particular, about it doesn't look good. Um, Opinion matters, perception matters, and uh, it's I mean it's almost an ideological battle, an ideological civil war on the left between Greens and Labor. But the the push from the Greens is that, well, any moderate response from Labor makes them complicit with genocide. But and I've talked. No, I didn't talk about it. I was going to talk about it. I had no space for it. The fact that coming out of the last federal election, the Greens lost a lot of their influence in the lower house, a lot of their influence full stop. The Labor was returned to power in their own right, and but it came at the cost. Obviously, the coalition took a big hit, but what people didn't really pay much attention to, or didn't get a lot of coverage, was how much of a hit the other minor parties or the more progressive parties, if they look at it in that way, the further left, the Greens took a massive hit, and the Teals to a degree as well. The the article that I was looking at, or the stuff I was looking at, suggested that the Labor win at federal level had been very broad, but not very deep. Now, it was very broad in terms of they got a lot of seats, they basically secured power, but it lacked depth because a lot of those seats saw swings against them. So, yep, they've picked up seats from other parties that did worse. Yep, not a problem. They've had swings towards them in that regard. But in a lot of other seats, including some very safe seats, swings went against them, either to independents or smaller groups. Basically, the it was a tepid win, and so the idea that people can now run around and push these policies or ideas, it's well, there's not really a viable opposition to them. But question is that going to be refused by the public at the next election? Maybe. And so when you've got Greens pushing things like this, I don't think it's giving them the support that they desire. And especially after the peace plans come into force, it really, uh, I don't think it is going to give them the long-term outcomes that they're hoping for. This last statement, though, I don't know that that's necessarily the case. Yes, okay, Labor's shifted its position. Public opinion, I don't think, really drifted away from Israel. If you look at media reporting the whole way along, it's never really been pro-Israel. And uh, the fact that Labor did this, it's kind of always been in their wheelhouse, always been one of the positions they've had. So it's not really a change as such. It's just they're sort of going through with what they've always had planned. Uh, yeah. But the idea, though, that it was invoked for fundraising, just uh, really, really poorly timed and a bad idea altogether, I guess. All right, moving on from that, we're going to look at some stuff to do with the upcoming under 16 social media ban. There is increasing pushback now coming from the from various media firms, YouTube, so social media companies and online companies who are going to be suffering as a result. YouTube are now starting to wade into the mix a little bit more publicly and now starting to cite examples of Australians in particular who have come to fame because they've had access to YouTube and other material from the time they were under the age of 16 and being able to roll forward. And so they're citing, in this case, Troye Sivan, who came to fame in part based on his YouTube content. Some of the other articles that have appeared have had people who are politically active, mainly progressives, who are utilising the social media and stuff, and who did so from before the age of 16. It's like, well, yeah, okay. There's also elements to suggest that, okay, yeah. I mean, they're almost the exceptions to the rule, I guess. But Google's claim here is one of the things that I guess I personally have wondered at and didn't. I mean, I'm sure there's probably stuff written down somewhere, but I'd not seen it. Uh, coming out of listening to the stuff coming out of the E-Safety Commissioner and the government, it, I don't have the confidence that they've adequately looked at the systems that are already in place for managing access to this sort of material by under 16s already. And that, I guess, what Google's saying here may just be dismissed out of hand because it's either not used or not being used effectively. Now, a lot of these sites have um, limitations already in place, mainly for under 13s, based on the COPPA, I think, um, US-led legislation and stuff. And so I guess you could see the under 16 ban here as like an extension of that to a slightly older age bracket. But there's a lot of parental controls already in place on streaming services and various content websites as well. And YouTube, for example, if you're creating an account, you basically can set an age bracket on it. And if you've got kids, you can set kids accounts, family, like set up a family type managed set of accounts, and then the kids accounts you can set to have varying levels of access to YouTube content, such as limiting them only to YouTube Kids, uh, or placing the age-based restrictions and using the age-based restrictions to hold them in place. And so Google's saying, look, YouTube should be exempted from this coming forward. Um, I can see their point, but I mean, the point that a lot of people were making all along was if parents were more engaged and using the existing systems correctly, or even using the existing systems at all, a lot of these issues would never come to a head because their children would be using them through managed interfaces already. But as we talked about the other day, once you have a motivated group of people with all the time on their hands, they're going to find ways around it. And that's going to be the same when they finally introduce the under 16 bans and the verification services. People are going to find their ways around it. At the same time, people are looking at things like the recent Salesforce breach, which has led to 5.3 million Qantas customers or something like that amount of personal data being released. Um, there's also the Discord breach recently, which has led to the potential release or the actual release of government verified ID data on a range of Discord users. G'day, Ash. Uh, yeah, they've had these age verification services saying, no, we're not going to hold this data, or Discord saying, well, we don't hold this data. Yet that seems to be misleading based on the breaches that have just recently happened or the data that's being released to show that, nope, this data was being held onto. And obviously the big concern is then being able identity theft and everything else. And you've got millions and millions and millions of records that are suddenly appearing on individuals. Yeah, the security conscious people are concerned about the impact of what's happening and the ability to work around it. The concern, I mean, I'm a bit concerned with this, was the idea that child accounts are going to be disabled as of December the 10th. Uh, well, which basically means YouTube Kids is no longer accessible to Australian children. That might be a good thing. The problem, and if you've ever done this on YouTube, for example, had a look at the interface with an account and without an account, it's a different level of chaotic, a different level of chaos. And the sort of ads that are then put up with content is um, problematic, I guess. If you've got an adult account and you're looking at YouTube through an adult account, you're going to get ads that uh, can be adult oriented. Sports gambling ads, for example, movie trailers for MA 15 plus or R-rated movies or other content that a child might find disturbing. Now, those sort of ads are going to appear when you're signed out of a Google account because, well, now there's no restriction on what you can and can't see. Well, limited restriction on what you can and can't see through YouTube. And so then you've removed this protective mechanism. Kids now won't be on YouTube Kids anymore. They're going to have to come across to the grown-up YouTube and use it signed out, and they're gonna be exposed to content, uh, both posted content and also advertisement content that um, they weren't going to be exposed to previously. So in terms of child safety, it's latching one small gate but knocking down the fence next to it. It's counterproductive, and it's going to remove a lot of the safety mechanisms that are in place. There, exactly what I just said. The other thing, so I said they're saying that it prevents career paths for people who produce content, um, people who started content when they're young and move forwards. Yeah, and the idea that they're going to know how to get around it, like at least a third. It's going to stop the honest, and even then, I don't think it's going to stop the honest either. They'll just use it signed out. Um, However, the government said that there'll be no exemptions and the platforms will be expected to facilitate the new restrictions. Yeah, the government making insane directions. I don't think I've ever seen Labor know what they're talking about in the tech world. I mean, well, the NBN. Their idea of the NBN was better than Turnbull's idea of the NBN. I'll give them that. Although we're now finally getting to the point that households are getting gigabit connections, but it's not nationwide. And a big part of that's fault, not just the coalition, but it's also the telco. I mean, Telstra said they didn't own the pits anymore, but there's a lot of hangover, I guess, in um, IT and telephony circles from Telstra, Telecom, Postmaster General. That's what they were back in the day. Yeah, it's a mess, but we're getting there slowly, slowly. The article here, though, is talking about the idea that they're going to challenge the band's constitution legitimacy under the Constitution, and to do that, they need to find an appropriate case study, an appropriate example, and so it's not going to be easy. It's going to be expensive. It's going to go for a long time, but they're going to find a. They're going to wonder who the candidate under 16 is that they're going to use for this purpose. They probably haven't identified them yet, but they think, I mean, there's arguments, and I mean, these are fair arguments too, that the ban could be overturned because of its impact on its implied right to the freedom of political communication. Okay, you look at who is writing this article, the ABC, and they're taking a position of it's suppressing political speech by progressive young people. Yeah, okay, that's very much in line with what the ABC wants to say and wants you to think. The and they've put forward this young climate activist as saying, well, look, she wouldn't have had access or been able to use Instagram to talk about environmental justice or to share her political views. Okay, I'm not going to talk about her in particular. If you've ever had to listen to the political views of someone who's under the age of 16, you understand why it's a good idea to ban them or to get them to shut up until they grow older and get a bit more experience and understand things a bit better. I, uh, I I'd hate to think how preachy a lot of these politically active under 16-year-old podcasts and political content really is. I mean, it's the same sort of thing. Even through the ages of 18 to 21, you, you you're very ideologically pure because you've yet to run into the real world and find out that the real world doesn't work along the lines of some perfect ideological guideline. There's compromise, there's give and take, or the model, this desirable thing you've been sold doesn't work in reality because people are people. Very few, very few political ideologies or models account for the fact that people are people. Now, could argue that what I'm doing right now is just the same. Yeah, fair enough. Didn't say my viewpoints were any more enlightened than theirs, just better. But no, but see, it's a valid point though. I mean, why do I get, well, apart from the fact I'm over the age of 16, nice beard for a 16-year-old. Other than the age fact I'm over the age of 16, what gives me the authority or the right to be able to do this and stop them? And so this is the sort of argument that's being put forward, and it's a valid argument. But at the same time, I really don't want to hear the political views or be forced to hear the political views of a teenager. I can respect that they have them, but it's the sort of thing that, yep, vote when you turn 18, all that sort of stuff. But I'd expect you to get a bit more experience, a lot bit more life experience before you start telling me what to do. But sharing her political views with a wide network, yeah, it's a bit easier when you get the bully pulpit of social media. And that's part of the problem too, is this individual is using it for political viewpoints. Sadly, a lot use it for, well, being teenagers. They take bullying onto the online sphere. Um, so yeah, uh, obviously she's checking in with her political friends and stuff like that. Well, they're the people she's involved with and active with, and of course it's going to be motivated to her when things come forward. This is going to this is going to impact my future. Okay, kid, take a deep breath. You haven't finished school yet. Okay, great to be politically aware and politically active. You've got a number of years of education yet to come, be it to further reinforce the position you already hold, or to develop some nuance, or to understand a bit more about the wider world. You've got time. All right, take the time to learn. But yeah, it, okay. Quite honestly, this is a self-centered statement, which is she's saying that if people aren't able to access social media, they won't be thinking about that when they go to their teens and when they reach voting age. So she's advocating for being able to control the minds of children. Kind of one of the reasons why the ban's being asked for in the first place. Don't think that's going to be a win that she thinks it is. But still, I do believe it is appropriate to challenge the legislation and that uh, I don't know necessarily that it's a bad thing to inhibit this sort of stuff. I mean, you can't. I mean, all right, we're halfway through the article. Let me show you something at the end of the article. Okay, have your say. But there's no comments. There's no discussion. It's tell the ABC what you think, but there's no discussion. So the ABC themselves are in a position where they're prohibiting the person, i.e. me, because I'm reading the article, from engaging in political debate. I just find a way around it. I go onto my channel and talk about it. But it takes away the option to discuss things. You can't sit there and whine and complain about this under 16 ban coming down when you refuse to allow comments on your own articles. It's hypocritical, really. And so, yeah, there's different groups, and it's quite funny to see the disparate nature of the groups coming together to counter, and that's yeah, kind of partially reassuring. So, yeah, the legislation as it stands is a poor solution to a genuine problem. Yes. Will there be a High Court challenge? More than likely. Yep, we don't have a Bill of Rights, quite clearly. And we don't have a First Amendment. Our Australia's constitutional protections and everything else, really quite interesting. It's not a bad constitution, certainly, but we don't have a Bill of Rights. We don't have a First Amendment. Don't have a Second Amendment. We do have a range of amendments, but they're not structured like the US. And I think that's the sort of thing that people tend to assume, especially US people tend to assume, that a lot of the world, if they're speaking English online, they're kind of got the protections or the rights to speech that the Americans do. Nah, nah. Some can be very, very limited. And we're constrained by the. I mean, you look at what's happening in the UK. Now, they're certainly leaning down on certain aspects of speech. Other nations aren't. So, yeah, it will be interesting. I mean, they're pushing the idea that it's suppressing political speech. I don't know. I mean, yep, clearly it's in the desire of, um, I guess, progressives to want to see this challenge, but there's many other reasons to challenge it. I don't know that that's the only reason to bring the case, and I don't know that that should be the only reason or the only allowance made. Um, uh, some suggesting the challenge won't come until after the lockdown or yeah the ban has come into force. Yeah, it's difficult. So YouTube said that there's other options they may follow as well based on the recent submission and the recent stuff. Hmm, they're at loggerheads. I mean, it's a bit like when the footage of the Ukrainian refugee who got brutally stabbed to death in the US back in August was circulating on social media and the actual media in other places. The e-safety commissioner or their office was threatening uh, social media users for posting or reposting the imagery and footage and were, well, lobbing threats, to which a lot of these users, being non-Australian, were laughing at them and laughing at the e-safety commissioner and saying, look, No, not going to happen. And, well, some people were looking at her previous work history and saying it's just an extension of what she was doing back then. And we're actually saying that you're suppressing not just speech on and discussion on what took place with the Ukrainian refugee, you're now heading towards suppressing speech on the ability to critique what it is the Safety Commission is doing. There's a line to be found. Um, I mean, yeah, the blatant reproduction of gore in a context or an environment you don't expect to see it is confronting and probably should be avoided. But is it a requirement for one nation to force another to take it down? That raises all sorts of curly questions. Uh, yeah, but the challenge and everything else. I mean, there's also now talk, sticking with the ban, is that various online games are going to face being part of the ban, but they're not currently part of the ban. The ban currently excludes online services that have the sole or primary purpose of enabling end users to play online games with other end users. But there's been stuff recently, well, it's always been around, but more prominently recently about the horrible stuff that's happening inside of services like Roblox. Microsoft has implemented chat reporting and certain chat filtering inside of Minecraft, and there's various other online communications within games that have been problematic. And again, people are going to find ways around things and do things. But the question is, because the definitions under the ban are vague, it's a bit hard to say, well, what's what? What can or can't be excluded? And then it comes down to an indistinct set of things and almost makes it a political tool, a political weapon, more than a method of protecting the community. And uh, yeah, um, Lego Play, I'd not heard much about terrible things happening inside it, but it's going to be difficult to capture this. Yep, Roblox is rightfully critiqued for a lack of effective moderation, but maybe they should be critiqued for far left material as well, fringe and far left material. It's not just one side of the political spectrum doing this, because then that just suggests this is being done to suppress political speech and not as a mechanism of protection. Yeah. I mean, are they going to ban Fortnite? Well, they've been playing Roblox for ages as well. Some people saying you're banning games for an overreaction. Well, yeah, safer games, etc. I don't know. You've It's been difficult forever, really, to manage the internal interaction, the online chat elements, how you regulate or how you monitor and moderate online speech. You can need to have active moderators, and people still take time to react. They've got a time to see it, process it, and react. It's potentially one of those things where people are going to find a way to work around whatever ban's in place. I mean, in Minecraft, there was don't know if it's still active, but there was a world that had been developed as an online library of sorts, digital bibliothèque of freedom. And the idea was that using various Minecraft elements, that there would be a repository of documents, books, etc., that were banned in various places around the world, and it would give users or players from those countries a means to access that material through the avenue of Minecraft. Well, that's just going to lead to Minecraft being banned in those countries. Or people in those countries who probably already had a desire to read that material probably already had access to that material. But the intent was that it was to provide a pathway for political expression of access to freedom. And, well, I mean, every nation has material they don't want shown. But the idea was there. Now, you can argue that under this sort of under 16 ban, something like that should be banned from Australian under 16s. Comes down to this idea that it's a vague system, and yeah, if I mean it will be implemented, I dare say, it's going to be an absolute mess from 10th of December onwards. It's going to be bad. All right, we've got not much else. All right, next one. This one's kind of a social type thing. Came out over the weekend. This is the latest, well, one of the most recent updates on it. There's a case in Perth coming out over the weekend, late last week, where a gentleman walking his dogs had them attacked, had them stabbed, as the headline says. Ended up one of the dogs had to be put down, and the other dog had very severe health issues and taken to the vet, etc. Now, the headline as it was like, no, terrible, had their dogs set upon. There'd been a case a week or so before that, I think it was up in Broome or somewhere in Western Australia, where a dog had been tied up outside a shop. So the owner had secured the dog, it wasn't loose, went to the shop, came out to find his dog either dead or nearly dead, had been attacked by a group of people. And so that was bad news. But the headline here, and a lot of the services that covered stories on it, sort of led with this heartbreaking, heart-bleeding headline. But then you read into the articles or you read into the details, and okay, so they're calling for justice after a morning walk ended in heartbreak when a stranger stabbed two pet dogs. All right, so what were they? It was a Mastiff and a Staffy, and a Staffordshire Terrier. Okay, they're two dogs that can be extremely intimidating and can be extremely violent. Okay, fair enough. Maybe they were under control, maybe there was extenuating circumstances, but we've already set now the nature of what dogs these were. Um, some people would say that they're potentially pit bull type adjacent. Well, depending on whether they were Bitzers or purebreds. I mean, that might make a bit of a difference. It could just be that they are straight up Mastiffs and Staffies. We'll go with that. They take morning walks with the owner through an off-leash area. Okay, already I'm getting more concerned about the details of what went on. I've got dogs. I never walk them off lead. Not that I don't trust them. I don't trust other people. And I don't trust other dog owners. If I was out and about walking or walking with my dogs and there was a Mastiff and a Staffy off lead, I'd immediately be concerned about what was about to happen. The pets approached a stranger and his dog and they were stabbed. Right, so the Staffy and the Mastiff were off lead. They ran up to another person who was walking their dog. Now, don't say whether their dog was on lead, but they ran up. Okay, so the owner says the dog's harmless. She goes up and says hello. Uh, okay, it might have been daunting there. You've got two dogs coming your way and you panic. Okay, a Mastiff and a Staffy charging at you off lead while you're walking your dog. I think most people, quite rightly, would be a bit afraid or justifiably cautious or ready to defend themselves. I was right there, man. I was right there. I was talking to you. I was calling out to you. Just hang on. So you didn't have your dogs act under control. One of the key pieces of legislation, I guess, depends on where you are, which state you are. I don't know what the rules are in Western Australia, but where I live, the legislation controlling um, domestic animals is that you are to have your dog under control at all times. And that includes in off lead areas. And if you can't guarantee that off lead, then you don't walk your dog off lead. The rangers will, if they find out, will take your dog. Well, fine you. Eventually, your dog will get destroyed if it goes bad enough. So the Staffy and Mastiff charging down another dog walker, and the dog owner's yelling at the dog walker to leave him alone. And it's like, well, hang on. I can understand that the other dog walker's now is going to act in self-defense and made an effective way to stop the other two dogs. Um, Caused one of them to be put down, and the other one had severe issues. The other dog owner denied the news request for comment. He said the dogs were attacked with a multi-use tool, so like a Leatherman, and it's illegal to carry an edged weapon in Western Australia without a lawful reason, like work or recreation. Self-defense is not a legal excuse. I don't know that that's. I mean, I. I mean, if you can't carry a Leatherman, well, I mean, it's like a Swiss multi-tool. It's got a blade in it, but it's also got other tools. Are you not allowed to carry them? I mean, it's quite possible. Uh, it's the the initial headline and then the details of the story. I I mean, I'm sure the police and the investigations will come to a viable outcome, to a sensible outcome. But based on the ridiculous amount of stories of dog owners being attacked by off-lead dogs, or even just people being attacked by off-lead dogs, it's it seems like the owners of the dogs that were put down have rushed to the media to try and sell their story first. Uh, I can I can understand why the other dog owner acted the way they did. I mean, hell, we had an article just a couple of weeks ago about that girl in the Hunter Valley that was attacked and killed by a dog she knew. It wasn't her dog, but by a dog she knew. And there's been cases all the time of this happening. And so you've got this happening where off-lead dogs have run up and caused issue. I mean, just in the last 12 months, I've been bitten twice by other dogs. Wasn't walking my dog at the time. I was out for a walk and it launched at me when I walked past. And these are these little ankle biter type things. Or more seriously, it never broke the skin, but it went after the hamstrings, went after the back of the knee, didn't get a chance. I mean, a more substantive dog went after the back of the knee and tried to, I mean, didn't bite. But it's one of those things that, how much further do you allow the attack to go before you react and act in safety, act in self-defense? I mean, I've seen at dog training clubs how quickly a dog bite can take place and how non-threatening the situation can be before the bite, and then how serious, how deep a puncture wound can be, and how much blood can appear if you're not careful. And when you're then dealing in a situation where the dog is aggressive, off lead, and coming at you, yeah, there's got to be a line where it's safe or it's appropriate to respond. That's why I don't walk my dogs in some places, because just I can't trust other dog owners in those areas. Doesn't matter how safe I am with my dog. If they're attacked and I'm attacked, well, it's going to change. It's going to influence them. It's going to hurt them and everything else. I don't want that risk. So, yeah. I mean, this has been a lot over the news a lot over the weekend. It may disappear completely as more details come to light. Yeah, who's to say? All right. What else we got? Couple of articles, couple of sites were reporting on this. They were reporting that uh, massive numbers of Aussies are living below the poverty line or in poverty. It wasn't just Nine News covering it. There's a couple of other sites covered it. I mean, it may have been part of other media groups owned by Channel 9, possibly. Um, we had a look at various articles over the last couple of weeks about cost of living concerns, people going into retirement without enough money for a comfortable retirement, people entering retirement without being property owners or like without having a home, they're being renters, etc. Problems in particular for women entering retirement due to far due to due to much reduced superannuation levels, etc. There's a problem in society somewhat, I guess. I mean, these problems, I guess, will never go away, and conditions of living, so living conditions for the impoverished is still a lot better than, I guess, most people were living in 100 years ago. It still doesn't make it any better. That, I mean, still doesn't mean it's a good thing. We had 27.5 million people in the country, according to the stats the other week. We've got 1 in 7 Australians below the poverty line, which is less than half the median income. That's what, like $75,000 a year, I think is the median, or 86 now is the median income. 3.7 million people. Now, 1 in 7, that's more than 10%. I mean, I prefer percentages. So 3.7 million, that's, yeah, well north of 10%. That's quite a large percentage. Now, I don't know what other nations are like, but to me, that stands out as something, well, all poverty should be addressed, but you don't stop to think that that many people are in poverty, impoverished in a country like Australia. I mean, there are communities that where impoverished conditions are more likely, such as Aboriginal communities. They will, not traditionally, they will tend to have lower socioeconomic status. There are the working class communities that grew up around factories or particular industries. They suffered when those industries left or collapsed. And so, yep, you've got suburbs that in the major cities that traditionally people look at as being, well, blue collar suburbs or now impoverished suburbs as those industries have left and not much else has moved in. And the concern is that it's growing. Now, since 2023, it showed a jump of nearly 500,000 people. We also had massive migration as well, and some of them recent migrants, if they're struggling to find work, may also be in this position. And so some of that as well. We did have a very, very famous declaration on poverty, as you can see there, by Bob Hawke back in 1990 um, it wasn't 1990, in 1987, he made the comment of the statement that by 1990, no Australian child will be living in poverty. It's one of those uh, famous quotes out of Australian politics, and one of those famous quotes out of Australian politics that never came to pass. So sadly, we never got to the point of no Australian child living in poverty by 1990 or any other time, but it was still important and good to get the focus on the conditions that led to poverty and everything else. And I mean, people might talk about the ASPC ads with Sarah McLachlan as being heartrending ads in on American TV. Australian TV had, I mean, depending on where you lived, I know I certainly saw them. I think the Smith family were the ones that did the ads. There was a series of ads, and I mean, the Salvos might have done it too, but I think the Smith family are the ones I saw, of basically a school kid, primary age school kid, um, uh, three or four variations on the ad, are basically the kids struggling to get uniforms, school bags, all this sort of stuff, and you can quite clearly see the implied statement that this kid's going to get bullied, they're struggling, they're going to fall behind, that it's not the kid's fault. Sometimes it's not even the parents' fault because, well, they just don't have the money or the funds. It's not a case of them wasting the money, it's just not there. And so it's a call to charity to say, look, help provide support for these kids so that they can go to school with appropriate shoes and uniforms and uh, bags and gear and things like that. Now, every school, well, unless it's a private school, I guess, most government schools are going to have a portion of their students who are in this condition. It's not nice, certainly there. And I mean, yeah, funds available to the impoverished have gone up, but well, advocacy groups are saying that it's not enough, that we need to help things out. Uh, that also comes back to the question of, well, there's two parts to it really. One is how much money do you need to be comfortable, and should a social welfare net provide a comfortable life, or is it a means to provide safety to the point that you can continue to job search or build skills so that you can then move back into employment? Is it it's a safety net to make sure that it's not going to be comfortable, but you're not going to die? And so, uh, yeah, that's one of those questions of how welfare services should work. Yeah, clearly those in poverty or in impoverished conditions are going to benefit more from an increase. Clearly, they're below the point where more money doesn't mean better outcomes. More money means better outcomes within this such a condition. But you've then also got problems as well that, I mean, people look at people on welfare spending money on alcohol and cigarettes and gambling and things like that. Certainly, there are addictive um, behaviours that are very financially disadvantageous to anybody, but more so when you're already struggling um, to make ends meet or struggling because of you're on welfare payments. You and the suggestion is, should you ban or limit people's access to it? Well, in general, yeah, but it's unfair to I mean, the counter argument is that it's unfair to have that as a condition of receiving welfare. It's taking people's agency away from them. If it means that there's more money for the kids to go to school or get their school shoes or that sort of thing, maybe. I don't know. It's one of those damned if you do, damned if you don't type things. But people still need an outlet, um, still need a relief of some sort from the conditions that they face. And so an escape of some form. Now, it's not completely escapism. And so these are the sort of problems that face any sort of welfare program, and the idea of being able to direct what people do or don't do with the resources you give them. And some people will flat out refuse. It's the sort of thing with homeless people that some people will refuse to go into a shelter. So there may be beds available in a homeless shelter, but because they generally come with conditions of behaviour and use and things like that, some of the homeless are like, no, no, refuse. Will not will not engage in that sort of, like, they don't want to commit to those standards because it's an impost, and they're like, no, 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 I'm good. Yeah, some people, well, do want help, but they don't want conditions attached. So it's it's a problem. And as rents outpace, cost of housing outpaces wages, and cost of living rises, sadly, I think we're just going to see more people reach this impoverished line. And I don't know that social security completely is the answer. I don't think it is. I mean, increased wages are great, but yeah, I I don't know. And then you've also got disparity of where these people are in the country. I mean, yep, some will be in the cities, but I think a lot more of them are regional. Yeah, it's a hard problem to solve, and that's one I think government's been looking at forever, really. All right, back to COVID stuff. This is um, no, it's not going to come down. Okay, so experts demand apology for COVID vaccine mandates to restore public health trust. Came up this morning. I only saw it recently. I only saw it come up this morning. The It seems like there's still fallout from the former Victorian Chief of Officer's statements from the other week, admitting that the state had overcorrected during the lockdown mandates, etc. But where is this paper? Public Health Policy Journal. I don't know how reliable that is as a paper, but this idea of vaccine mandates and lack of transparency has led to a plummeting trust in public health. Yeah, that seems like a statement of the obvious. Well, to some people, other people are like, what do you mean? We talked about this the other week when we looked at an article that was talking about declining vaccination rates for existing safe vaccines for things like measles and whatnot. So we're not talking about COVID jabs. We're talking about the decades long vaccination schedule and vaccines that have been used like forever, and how there was a increasing reluctance from people to go and get those jabs. And the article had obviously a number of potential causes for it. And out of those causes and contributing factors, all but one of the factors were consistent over time, or relatively consistent, which was like access to doctors, um, inability to get appointments, things like that. The one that had changed in the last 10 years, so in the last 5, 6 years, was the impact of the impact of COVID, of the imposed vaccination program and everything else, and the outcomes that people got from it, the injuries that people got from the vaccines, etc., the lack of transparency in what was going on. And so it took a bunch of people who were not anti-vaxxers, I mean, they never changed their position, but who were either vaccine hesitant or ambivalent, and has driven them into an anti-vaccine stance or into a more hostile stance. And they, well, demand more trust. They demand more safety and transparency before accepting the schedule or not buying into it at all. And the people who were arguing that this was going to lead to a breakdown of public trust back when it was going on, yeah, they had their voices suppressed. They were dismissed as cooks, as crazy people. But yeah, I don't think though that the the loss of trust in public health is going to be undone by an apology. Oh no, no, the damage is generational. It's it's the sort of thing that, yeah, the people involved with forcing it down people's throats, I don't think stop to consider the long-term consequences. Really, I was talking to someone the other day about it. The idea that we had a lot of people who were in positions of leadership in their relative industries or relevant areas of work and life and things like that, but they were being called upon to make decisions or to provide guidance at a level far beyond what they were used to. And so people panicked, people didn't know how to cope with the sudden responsibility or lack thereof, and that quite often there was a lack of accountability and responsibility to be had in uh, various sections. Um, Divisive cardiologist. Yeah, okay, fair enough. I mean, not happy. I mean, he's obviously got, sounds like he's been a, okay, vocal critic of the mRNA vaccines. Not the only person. Um, but I don't know that even if there's a public apology to vaccine injured patients, the public, and whistleblowing doctors, it's not going to fix things. I mean, it's a political problem at this point. Just look at, I mean, look at US politics, really. Look at what happened coming out of, going into and coming out of Trump's first term. Look at what's happened going into the start of his second term. There's been malfeasance that's been shown to have existed and been done on a political basis. Yet, even if one side apologised for what they did, it's not going to fix the problem. It's not going to change what people think. It's just going to reinforce the ideas that people already have. And, well, out of these suggestions, okay, I don't know that that's going to carry much. I mean, yes, maybe they should front up to what they did to suppress people who were not buying into things straight up. Okay, fair enough. But a global moratorium on mRNA vaccines, particularly COVID-19 ones, yeah, I see the medical papers that people were putting forward out of the New England Medical Journal, out of Lancet, out of BMJ, and out of a bunch of other medical journals around the place. The papers didn't give the didn't show the unequivocal science that people said they did, and that there were aspects of concern with how the papers were written or who wrote the papers, who was funding the papers, that were it any other industry, were it, say, climate science, they would have been rejected. as being industry plants. Yet, for some reason, that level of cognitive critical assessment just wasn't being applied. And there were other concerns about the um, the nature of some of the studies and the conclusions reached that didn't seem to carry the statistical weighting that was claimed. And as a result, it was like, well, then the paper being waved around as being this is the gospel truth. You now go and do what we tell you to. It became a political tool, and it wasn't allowed to stand on the science, or the science within it wasn't allowed to be assessed and discussed in a rational, reasonable manner. And so any potential good that the paper actually had the ability to do was very rapidly undone with how it was used as a weapon. And there were papers withdrawn during that period, published by the Lancet and then withdrawn. There were, um, I mean, it's the sort of time and space, it's very hard to reproduce studies. So you've got the reproducibility crisis affecting all science, affecting these papers as well. It it was messy. It was messy, and so the cautious response, which was okay, we're going to sit on hands and let information build, was seen as a denial, as a denier's position. And when you talk about, say, politicization or extremism of ideas, this is one of those events where if you weren't all for it, you must be completely against it. And so the moderate position, or the position that was like, let us take the time to read these and understand these papers and have a look at how these jabs have been brought onto the market, what studies, like what's their safety, um, what's their effectiveness, where are the test, uh, where's the animal testing results, where are the human test results? Like they've got to go through an accreditation process. Where are these results? Like how many of the the medical testing bodies and cohorts, what were their results? And so people got suspicious. And then that suspicion was then regarded uh, as being a heretic, and you were then treated as such. And yeah, it's that whole phase for a couple of years there. It's going to be yeah, it's a very interesting study set of studies, I guess, observations, example of groupthink and appeals to authority. There is, yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that everybody was in it, it might have been possible to have a bit more objective statements and observability. So, are we going to see accountability? Well, don't know that this effort to restore legitimacy, I don't know that that is going to be enough. Like I said, the damage is done. It's generational damage now. I can't see a path, even if they did do this, the trust has been broken to the extent um, that, yeah, it's not just, oh, we're sorry. That's not going to bring people back. It might bring some back. Yeah. Um, uh, yeah. I mean, they're citing uh, the former Victorian Chief Health Officer's statements as support for their position. Fair enough. Saying that, yeah, the public health crisis, uh, it's, yeah, problematic, very problematic. Uh, diddle do. There's other elements. So yeah, people accused of then spreading misinformation and pseudoscience about the about COVID vaccines and stuff. Well, that's just the words used to describe somebody. I mean, potentially it is, but when it gets used as a blanket statement, it doesn't help anyone. Does not help anyone. So, I mean, yeah, trust. There you go. Trust in the CDC since 2020 to 2025 went from three-quarters to less than two-thirds. That's quite a fall. That's quite a fall. Um, BMJ Good Health, that is a British medical journal, I think, that mandatory COVID vaccine policies did more the harm than good, damaging trust, vaccine confidence, yes, political polarisation, yep. All right, human rights, inequities, and social well-being. Okay, I haven't talked about those sort of things, but yeah, they had an impact on that. I mean, uh, various elements of society suffered more than others. They said that there was a period of wealth transfer, one of the greatest periods of wealth transfer ever. The rich got much richer, and everybody else suffered pretty much. Even more critically, trust in doctors and hospitals in the US from nearly three-quarters to less than half in 4 years. It's yeah, it people don't trust doctors anymore. And there's some people who are unlikely to ever trust them again. So, uh, whilst no, I don't agree with this. If you've ever been put in a position of leadership or decision making, particularly in a field where you're not going to get, uh, never going to get 100% information that you need to make the decision, you're going to know that this is an excuse. That if you're going to use this to justify why you did what you did, you shouldn't be making those decisions. You should step aside and let someone else who can do it or who's willing to accept responsibility to come through and do it. So, yeah, decisions were made under uncertainty, guided by the best. Well, I don't think it was necessarily. Yep, it's an excuse. Cannot extend it indefinitely. Once evidence emerged that challenged initial assumptions, the ethical obligation is to reassess policy. No, thumb screws got tightened. And yeah, failure to oh, back up. Failure to acknowledge details to do with the vaccines, perhaps the most egregious failure. And yeah, I agree with that. It's just it's a problem. Why is it coming up anyway? Um, it, yes, rather than engaging, they people largely went down a reputational attack and professional sanctioning. Silence over silence, silence over science. It's yeah. I think it didn't just damage people's trust in medicine. It damaged people's trust in science. Really, it's uh, yeah. It's interesting. It's a I think it's a fair article. Quite obviously, there's going to be a lot of people. Um, uh, yeah. Uh, okay. So in October, the final report into Australia's COVID response concluded that heavy-handed rules and vaccine mandates had eroded public trust. What a surprise. Uh, we have a responsibility, particularly as a government, to examine our response to the pandemic, learn what. Okay, no, you didn't do anything well. Um, as of July, so this is concerning. Well, not concerning. It just sort of highlights what people have been doing and saying and where it's all come from. That As of July 2025, 2.3 million, or about 8% of the population, have taken a COVID vaccine in the prior 12 months. That's less than the number of people in poverty that we just covered. And that the government now only recommends the vaccine for those aged 65 and over and people with severe immunocompromise. So they're now back to the cohorts they should have been sticking with. Oh, anyway, for those individuals recommended to receive the vaccine, the risks of severe disease from COVID-19 are the highest, and the benefits of vaccine outweigh the risks for the defined population. In other words, if you get COVID, it's going to be worse than getting the side effects from the jabs. This word, okay, coming from the TGA. If you've read a lot of government documents, policy documents, things to do with liability, um, where you can see people trying to dodge out of taking responsibility for something. To see a word like largely appear, so it's telling that the statement is not COVID vaccines are safe. It's COVID vaccines are largely safe. That's a very interesting qualifier to put on a thing. Now, uh, if I had the time and wherewithal to look deeper at it, I'd look at what largely is meant to represent in a document like that. I mean, sure, there's the guideline somewhere as to when you should use that word. It's like the use of the word shall, or um, yeah, it's a directive, as in so and so shall do X, Y, Z. It's a directive to the individual reading or to the individual so named to go and do what they've got to do. It's a um, it it comes down to, I guess, a very legal definition or a very legal use of the word. I mean, there's shall, there's will, there's a couple of other, I can't remember the other words that were often used. But when you saw words like that, you knew that what it was talking about was basically an order to go and do that, or else you'd be in breach of whatever that document or book or policy or whatever it was. And it's um, yeah, legalese to an extent, but it it's important to understand, I guess, how those words get used. Largely, that's interesting. Kind of not interested. I want to see what the comments are. All right. Sticking, I guess, with health things. We'll finish up soon. There's a couple of other health, I mean, some other lifestyle type ones, but we're not going to cover them. This is a sad statement on reproductive health, I guess. It's also a statement on the accessibility of healthcare services to regional and rural Australia. And you might expect to say, oh, well, if somebody living in rural and regional Australia is more likely to encounter negative health outcomes compared to someone living in a major city who has access to top quality healthcare, etc. That just seems to go without saying, or has been said, and I've said it a few times as well. And then you stop and think about things like miscarriage and other reproductive health outcomes, and stop to think, well, yeah, that will also affect rural and regional Australians more than those in the cities. And as a report has come to light, it's not a small difference. 60% more likely. Um, and not just access to care is a problem, you've also got access to support, perinatal support and access to grief counselling and things like that. There's there's a requirement for more stoicism. It's not obviously it's not a thing that anyone wants to have to encounter, but when it happens, and is it a case of is it a procedural thing? Is it doctors not washing their hands sort of thing? Well, no, it's just harder to access the necessary health care. And well, yeah, sadly, if it's to the point that only a handful of hours is the difference between viability and miscarriage, I mean, it can be very, very sudden. It can be very, very sudden. And it's very sad when it happens. And I think um, certainly all the families I knew growing up, it wasn't never talked about. It's one of those things that tends to be suffered in silence. But I think every family I knew growing up had some experience with miscarriage, whether or not they had kids or not. That there was a an experience with miscarriage, and that's not to count all the other 3 12-week natural things where the pregnancy doesn't progress, but like mm, late term or mid term miscarriages or even stillbirth. I mean, yes, reproductive health has gotten a lot better, maternal health has gotten a lot better, but yeah, it's still something that is very pervasive. Um, and to have, oh, I mean, sadly, multiple recurrent pregnancy loss, uh, yeah, and accessing the grief services afterwards, if you're remote or regional, it's a lot harder. I don't know. I so national care standards and continuity of care models. Okay, it's only going to affect the miscarriages that could have been saved with timely medical intervention. It's not going to save the ones that were always headed for miscarriage. And uh, culturally safe support implies that there is a cultural element to it too that is defined, well, has an ethnicity element related. So, oh, and that doesn't help that midwifery centres have been shut down since 1990. Yeah, it adds risk. 3 miscarriages since 2023. Oh, it's terrible for that mother. Uh, it's just, yeah, it it happens, and it sounds like they're all relatively advanced. So she knew she was pregnant. There was enough to get a fetal heartbeat. So, yeah, and it's traumatic if a if the pregnancy is no longer viable, but it takes time or a delay in getting everything fixed up. And yeah, the traumatic for the mother to carry a non-viable pregnancy for that period of time, and it can pose a risk to the mother as well because, well, there's no longer nutrients being exchanged. Um, it can become toxic and cause significant health concerns to the mother. Yeah, which is, but yeah, it's support is there is support, but it's limited, far more limited, and Uh, yeah, it's. I mean, in this case here, it's well not going to change the fact the miscarriage is happening. It's just going to change how it's handled. So it's one of those sad things. So all right, I don't need to talk about that anymore. Well, since we're staying with sad things, human trafficking in Australia. Okay, they're just more people, hence it's an all-time high. I don't know. It's a video. I'll give. No, in fact, we'll call it there actually. So I'll drop in the chat, put some tunes up, and close things out. Try and keep things to a relatively manageable level. Okay, so big thank you to everyone coming out today, regulars, first timers, chatters, lurkers, and everybody in between. Your support of this community and these channels is very much appreciated. It wouldn't be the same without you. So thank you very much all for being here. The next stream that we've got scheduled is tomorrow night. It's going to be a gaming stream again. We're looking at continuing our Pillars of Eternity playthrough. And then we're looking at the next Just Chatting stream, maybe for Thursday. We'll see. See what comes up in the next little while or what other stories I might go back to that I've skipped. But we'll see. And then we've got Friday night Prince of Persia Warriors Within, and then our Subnautic series over the weekend, and Extreme Exorcism next Monday. If you want to keep on top of things, check the socials. Mainly Twitter and Insta. Messages go out on both of those before each stream indicating what we're when. The Discord will pick up the Twitter and Insta messages eventually, as well as sending a message out when the stream goes live. It's also where our giveaways go on. So we've got giveaways every week. If you're interested in partaking in that, head to the Discord. You'll find a channel called Giveaways. In there is a blue button for the active giveaway. Click the blue button and you're automatically in the draw, and that gets drawn before every Sunday's stream. This week it is a copy of Return to Monkey Island. So good luck to everybody with that. But other than that, I think we'd like to conclude there for the day. So again, big thank you for everyone coming out. And we look forward to seeing you again next stream.